this is not an argument that would really stand the test, but it comes in handy to make a political case for it and to also provide an explanation for a potential transition period.
Now, Hungary will avoid US sanctions for continuing to buy oil and gas from Russia for another year. The US president hopes pressurizing countries to buy energy from elsewhere will bring Vladimir Putin to Ukraine peace negotiations. Here's the US president speaking earlier.
It's an honor to have a friend of mine here, Viktor Orban, the Prime Minister of Hungary, and he's done a fantastic job. He's a very powerful man within his country, but he's also beloved. They love Viktor, and people that know him do. He's run a really great country, and he's got no crime, he's got no problems like some countries do, but probably has a couple of things that I don't know about, maybe that I don't want to know about.
Zsuzsanna Vegh is political analyst at the German Marshall Fund and an expert on the politics of Hungary. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this afternoon on Times Radio. Can you talk us through how Viktor Orban and Hungary has managed to avoid sanctions with the United States?
Thank you very much for having me, Harry. Prime Minister Orban in Hungary has been long investing a lot of political capital and effort into building close ties with President Trump, going back as early as 2016 when Trump first announced that he's going to run for president, and ever since Prime Minister Orban really committed to him as a potential political ally. This commitment deepened even in the past few years when President Trump was not in power, and ultimately they built a close relationship built on political affinities. I believe this played into the exemption that Hungary managed to achieve from the sanctions, but also Hungary did offer some concessions, if you will, or commitments to the United States that can be interpreted as an effort to start a potential diversification from Russian sources in the future and move towards American energy sources. The details are very vague, and the prospects, even if there is a move in this direction, would take a long time. But in the short term, it was necessary for the Prime Minister to commit to some things. This would be primarily LNG nuclear cooperation, because ahead of next year's parliamentary election, he couldn't risk any sort of sanctions or a big energy hit on the country.
But Zsuzsanna, as I understand it, the sort of the reason why that Hungary has been allowed to carry on buying energy from Russia is because it's landlocked. And indeed, we've had a text in from one of our listeners saying Hungary's landlocked, and to get alternative oil and gas depends on the EU enabling alternative supplies, which they have not done so. It's the EU's fault, essentially. But there are lots of landlocked countries in the EU. I mean, Austria is landlocked. Czechia's landlocked. Switzerland's landlocked. I don't understand why is Hungary this special case?
I think it's a face-saving argument. It's not only that Hungary has, when it comes to gas, interconnectors with all its neighbors except Slovenia, but also there are examples with landlocked countries weaning off from Russian energy sources following Russia's full-scale invasion. For example, the Czech Republic. The Czech Republic has been massively dependent on Russian sources, and by this year, the country managed to completely come off from Russian sources. When it comes to oil, there is also an alternative pipeline, which Hungarian authorities, however, say would not be able to transport as much as Hungary needs. So this is not an argument that would really stand the test, but it comes in handy to make a political case for it and to also provide an explanation for potential transition period.
And Viktor Orban's been deepening his links with China. I'm just wondering how that sits with Trump's foreign policy ambitions, which is essentially to separate himself as much from China as possible. I'm wondering if that causes tensions between Hungary and the White House.
Not visible ones, but indeed, I think this is, apart from Hungary's energy dependence on Russia, is another contested area. If it's quite hard to really judge and say what the foreign policy of the Trump administration really is, but there seems to be indeed relative clarity on treating China as a competitor. So Hungary deepening relations with China and providing platform for Chinese companies to establish themselves on the European market should sit uneasy with the Trump administration, but it has not been publicly politicized just yet. I don't think that anything like that would happen before the next year's elections, because Trump is interested in also having Orban in power, but eventually this also could cause clashes.
So essentially, the White House wants to keep Viktor Orban in power, have a sort of a strong ally in the region. I'm just wondering, beyond next year's election, what do we think America wants to get out of this quite close tie with Hungary?
I think ultimately Hungary cannot offer all too much. What the Trump administration would want to get out of Hungary, however, is that it does not undermine its own strategic goals. And if the agreements now, for example, in the nuclear field is anything to go by, maybe the Trump administration will try to redirect Hungary rather in a more strategic manner than with sheer pressure in the future.
And Viktor Orban was obviously in the White House earlier this week. Lots of pictures of him being beamed around the world. Do we know how that went down back in Hungary? I mean, the majority of Hungarians very supportive of these close ties.
I think it's absolutely polarized by now in Hungary. And also such efforts of the Prime Minister are seen through a political lens. His own camp is, of course, celebrating the ties, whereas the opposition is overall critical, not necessarily of close ties with the United States, not at all, but of the general foreign policy of the Prime Minister, which is built on being on good terms with anybody, not really committing to anything on a value base. So this visit was also seen through this polarized lens. It also served to boost Orban's domestic image and to distract from his government's domestic failures regarding welfare, social issues over the past decade and a half.
Well, thank you very much indeed. That was Zsuzsanna Vegh, a political analyst at the German Marshall Fund, one of the experts in Hungary. Thanks for joining us on Times Radio.